I uninvited my dad from meeting his grandchild after what he said about my wife. What would you do if your own father insulted the woman you love right before she's about to give birth to your first child? I'm talking about cruel, unforgivable words that cut deeper than any knife. Well, that's exactly what happened to me, and the decision I made next tore my entire family apart. Some people say I'm a hero, others say I destroyed everything. But after you hear what my dad said about my pregnant wife, you'll understand why I had to make the hardest choice of my life. This isn't just a story about family drama. This is about the moment I realized blood doesn't always mean loyalty, and sometimes the family you choose matters more than the family you're born into. My name is David, and for 28 years I thought I had the perfect family. My dad was my hero, the man who taught me how to ride a bike, how to throw a baseball, and how to be what I thought was a good man. My mom was the glue that held us together, always making sure Sunday dinners happened no matter what. I have two siblings, an older brother named Marcus and a younger sister named Emily, and we were always close growing up. We had our fights, like any family, sure, but I never imagined that one day I'd have to choose between them and the woman I married. Then I met Sarah 3 years ago at a coffee shop where she worked, and everything changed. She had this smile that could light up the darkest room, and a kindness in her eyes that made me feel like I'd finally found home. We dated for a year, got engaged, and married in a small ceremony that, looking back now, should have warned me about the storm that was coming. From the very beginning, my family had issues with Sarah, though they tried to hide it behind fake smiles and polite conversations. My dad would make little comments about her background, how she came from a different part of town, how her family wasn't as established as ours. My mom would suggest that maybe we were moving too fast, that perhaps I should date around more before settling down. Marcus barely acknowledged her existence, acting like she was just a phase I was going through. Only Emily seemed genuinely happy for me, but even she would pull me aside sometimes and ask if I was sure about everything. The red flags were there, I see that now, but love makes you blind to the things you don't want to see. I convinced myself that they just needed time, that once they got to know Sarah like I did, they'd love her too. I told myself that families always have adjustment periods when someone new comes in, that this was normal. Boy, was I wrong about that. The tension simmered under the surface for 2 years, never quite boiling over but never going away either. 6 months ago, Sarah told me she was pregnant, and I swear I've never felt joy like that in my entire life. We'd been trying for about 4 months, and when she showed me that positive test with tears streaming down her face, I knew our lives were about to change forever. I immediately wanted to tell my family, convinced that a grandchild would fix everything, that a baby would make them finally see Sarah the way I did. We planned this whole announcement, bought a cute little onesie that said "coming soon," and set up a family dinner at my parents' house. The dinner started off well enough, with Mom's famous pot roast and Dad telling his usual stories about his days in construction. Then we dropped the news, and for a moment, just a beautiful, brief moment, everyone seemed happy. My mom cried, Emily squealed and hugged Sarah, even Marcus cracked a smile. But then I saw it. The look that passed between my dad and my mom, a look that said everything their mouths didn't. It was skepticism mixed with something darker, something that made my stomach turn. They asked the usual questions about due dates and whether we knew if it was a boy or a girl yet, but there was a coldness underneath it all that I couldn't shake. The months that followed were a masterclass in passive aggression and subtle cruelty. My dad would make comments about how expensive kids are, looking directly at Sarah when he said it, implying she wasn't financially stable enough. My mom started sending me articles about genetic testing and family medical histories, hinting that we didn't know enough about Sarah's background. Marcus openly questioned whether we were ready for parenthood, saying things like, "Some people just aren't cut out for kids," while staring at my wife. The worst part was how they never said anything directly horrible, nothing I could point to and say, that crosses the line. It was all plausible deniability, all statements they could laugh off as jokes or concern if I called them out. Sarah felt it though. I could see it in her eyes every time we left a family gathering. She'd be quieter on the drive home, would touch her growing belly protectively, and I knew she was wondering if our child would ever be truly accepted. I kept making excuses for them, kept saying they were just worried or adjusting to the change. Deep down, I was terrified of admitting that my family might be showing their true colors. I was caught between two worlds, wanting to protect my wife while desperately holding on to the image of the perfect family I'd grown up believing in. The baby shower incident. 6 to 7:30. Emily insisted on throwing Sarah a baby shower, and against my better judgment, we agreed. The shower was at my parents' house, filled with family friends, neighbors, and relatives I hadn't seen in years. Sarah looked beautiful that day, glowing in a blue dress that showed off her 7-month baby bump, smiling despite the anxiety I knew she felt. Everything seemed fine for the first hour. Games were played, gifts were opened, and people genuinely seemed excited about the baby. Then came the moment when my mom stood up to make a toast, and I should have known right then that we should have left. She talked about family traditions, about bloodlines, and about how important it is to know where you come from, all while looking directly at Sarah. The implication was clear to anyone paying attention that Sarah's family wasn't good enough, that her bloodline was somehow tainted. I saw Sarah's face crumble, saw her fight back tears as she smiled through my mother's thinly veiled insults. Emily tried to save it by jumping in with her own toast, talking about how lucky the baby was to have Sarah as a mother. But the damage was done. We left early, with Sarah crying in the car as I drove home, and that's when she first said the words that would haunt me. Sarah's heartbreak. 7:30 to 9. "They're never going to accept me, David," Sarah said through her tears, her hands protectively covering her stomach. "And that means they're never going to fully accept our baby either." I wanted to argue, wanted to tell her she was wrong, but the words stuck in my throat because I knew she was right. For the first time, I really allowed myself to see what had been happening, the microaggressions, the subtle put-downs, the way my family treated Sarah like she was temporary. "I don't want our child growing up feeling like they're not good enough," she continued, her voice breaking. "I don't want them to hear the kinds of things your parents say about me, to internalize that somehow they're less than because of who their mother is." That night, I held my wife as she cried, and I made a promise to myself that I would protect her and our child, no matter what that meant. I decided I would talk to my dad, man to man, and finally address the elephant in the room. I thought if I could make him understand how his behavior was hurting us, maybe we could salvage the relationship before the baby came. I called him the next day and asked if we could meet for lunch, just the two of us, to talk about some things. He agreed, and I spent the next few days rehearsing what I would say, how I would make him see reason. The confrontation. 9 to 11. We met at a diner we'd gone to since I was a kid. The same one where he'd taken me for my first heartbreak, my high school graduation, every major life event. I ordered coffee I didn't drink, pushed eggs around my plate, and tried to find the courage to start the conversation I'd been dreading. Finally, I just came out with it, told him that Sarah felt unwelcome, that the comments and implications were hurting both of us. My dad sat back in the booth, crossed his arms, and looked at me like I'd just spoken a foreign language. "You're being too sensitive," he said, his voice dismissive. "We've done nothing but welcome that girl into our family." I pressed on, gave him specific examples, the comments about her background, the implications at the baby shower, the way he and Mom looked at her. He waved it all away, said I was imagining things, that I was letting Sarah put ideas in my head. "That's what women like her do," he said, and there was something ugly in his tone now. "They isolate you from your real family, make you think everyone's against them so you'll choose them over your own blood." I felt my anger rising, but tried to keep calm, tried to explain that this wasn't about choosing anyone, it was about respect. That's when he leaned forward, looked me dead in the eye, and said the words that changed everything forever. "Listen, son, I'm going to be straight with you because clearly nobody else will. That woman you married isn't good enough for this family. Never was and never will be. She trapped you with this pregnancy because she knew it was her meal ticket to a better life.
My blood ran cold, but he wasn't done. When that baby comes, and trust me, I'm not even convinced it's yours, don't expect us to treat it like real family. It's one thing to tolerate your mistake. It's another to pretend her child is my grandchild. The diner seemed to spin around me as his words sank in. He'd just questioned my wife's character, implied she was a gold digger, suggested my child wasn't mine, and said he wouldn't accept his own grandchild as family. 28 years of love, respect, and admiration shattered in that moment like glass hitting concrete. I stood up from the booth, my hands shaking, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. "You're done," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but filled with more conviction than I'd ever felt. "You're done being part of my life, my wife's life, and my child's life." The aftermath of the decision. 12:30 to 14. My dad actually laughed when I said it, called me dramatic, said I'd come crawling back when reality hit. But I walked out of that diner and never looked back. I called Sarah from the parking lot, told her everything he'd said, and asked her what she wanted to do. Through her tears, she said she trusted me to make the right choice, and in that moment, the choice became crystal clear. I spent the rest of that day calling my family members one by one. I told my mom what Dad had said, and that unless she was willing to stand up to him and apologize to Sarah, she was uninvited from our lives too. She tried to downplay it, said Dad didn't mean it, that I was overreacting to words said in frustration. "He's your father," she pleaded, but I cut her off. "And Sarah is my wife, and this is my child. If you can't respect that, then you've made your choice." Marcus sided with Dad immediately, called me whipped, and said I was throwing away my family for a woman I'd known for 3 years. But Emily was different, though. She cried, said she understood, and asked if she could still be part of the baby's life. I told her she could, as long as she respected my boundaries and didn't try to play mediator or sneak information to Mom and Dad. The baby's arrival. 14 to 15:30. 2 months later, at 3 in the morning on a Tuesday, Sarah's water broke. We rushed to the hospital, and after 14 hours of labor, our son came into the world screaming and perfect. I held him for the first time and looked at his tiny face, his little fingers wrapped around mine, and I knew I'd made the right choice. This innocent child deserved to grow up surrounded by love, not tolerance, not judgment, not constant questions about whether he was good enough. Sarah was exhausted but glowing, and as I placed our son in her arms, I saw a completeness in her eyes that made my heart ache with happiness. Emily came to visit in the hospital, brought flowers and a stuffed elephant, and cried happy tears while holding her nephew. She took photos, told us how proud she was, and promised to be the best aunt ever. But my phone stayed quiet from everyone else. No call from Mom asking if we were okay, no text from Dad congratulating our nephew, no message from Marcus acknowledging his nephew's existence. The silence was deafening, but honestly, it was also peaceful in a way I hadn't expected.
The first few weeks with a newborn were chaos in the best way possible. Sleepless nights, endless diapers, and a love so fierce it sometimes scared me. Sarah was an incredible mother, natural and nurturing in ways that made me fall in love with her all over again. We created our own little family bubble, just the 3 of us, and it felt more like home than anything I'd experienced before. Emily visited weekly, spoiled her nephew rotten, and never once pressured us about reconciling with Mom and Dad. She told us that Dad was angry, that he ranted about ungrateful children and family loyalty. Mom was apparently heartbroken, crying often and looking at old photos of me as a baby, but still unwilling to apologize or admit that Dad had crossed a line. Marcus had cut me off completely, blocked my number, and according to Emily, referred to Sarah by horrible names I won't repeat. Friends and extended family members reached out, some to support us, others to call me selfish for keeping a grandfather from his grandchild. "He's an old man who spoke harshly once," an aunt told me. "Is that really worth destroying your family over?" But they didn't understand that it wasn't one harsh conversation, it was years of subtle disrespect culminating in unforgivable words. Despite my conviction, there were moments late at night when doubt crept in like a thief. I'd hold my sleeping son and wonder if I was depriving him of relationships that might have been valuable, if maybe I should have tried harder to make peace. What if my dad changed? What if he realized what he'd lost and genuinely wanted to make amends? What if my son grew up and resented me for keeping him from his grandparents? These thoughts aided me, made me question everything, made me wonder if I was being stubborn or strong. Sarah sensed my struggle, and we'd talk for hours about it, working through every angle and possibility. "I don't want our son growing up thinking that kind of disrespect is acceptable," she'd say. "If we let your dad back in without a real apology and changed behavior, what does that teach him about boundaries?" She was right, of course, but that didn't make it easier. I missed my dad, missed the version of him I thought he was, and grieved for the relationship I'd wanted my son to have with his grandfather. But I couldn't unsee what I'd seen, couldn't unhear what I'd heard, and couldn't pretend that love meant accepting abuse. When our son was 3 months old, my mom showed up at our house unannounced on a Saturday morning. I opened the door to find her standing there with my dad, both looking older than I remembered, both looking tired. "Please," my mom said before I could say anything, "just give us 5 minutes to talk." Against my better judgment, I let them in, though I didn't invite them to sit. Sarah stood at the top of the stairs with our son in her arms, watching but not descending. My dad spoke first, and I could tell the words were difficult for him to get out. "I spoke harshly at the diner," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "I didn't mean it the way it came out." That was it. That was his apology, an admission that he spoke harshly and a claim that his words didn't mean what they clearly meant. "What about the part where you said Sarah trapped me?" I asked. "What about questioning if my son is mine? What about saying you won't treat him like real family?" My dad's jaw tightened, and I could see the anger flashing in his eyes even as he tried to control it. "I'm here trying to apologize, and you're throwing it back in my face," he said, his voice rising. "This is exactly what she's done to you, turned you into someone who disrespects his own father." That comment about Sarah was the last straw, the final proof that nothing had actually changed. "Get out," I said, my voice steady despite the rage coursing through me. "Get out of my house and don't come back." My mom started crying, begging me to reconsider, saying they were trying their best. But their best wasn't good enough. Not when my dad still couldn't take responsibility for his words, not when he was still blaming Sarah for his own failures. "You need to leave now," Sarah said from the stairs, her voice calm but firm. "Your son asked you to leave, so respect his wishes." My dad looked up at her, and for a second I thought he might say something else horrible, but instead he just turned and walked out. My mom lingered for a moment, looked at me with tears streaming down her face, and whispered, "You're making a mistake." Then she followed my dad out, and I closed the door behind them. I stood there for a long moment, my hand still on the doorknob, my heart pounding, my emotions a complicated mess of relief and sadness. Sarah came down the stairs and wrapped her free arm around me, our son between us, and we stood there as a family, the three of us against the world. The months that followed were about building our own traditions and defining what family meant to us. We spent holidays with Sarah's parents, who were kind and welcoming and absolutely adored their grandson. We made friends with other young couples in our neighborhood, created a support system that felt genuine and warm. Emily remained a constant presence, the bridge between our world and the family I'd left behind, though she never pressured us to reconcile. She'd tell us bits of news, that Mom was seeing a therapist, that Dad refused to talk about us at all, that Marcus had gotten engaged to someone they apparently didn't approve of either. I felt bad for Marcus in a way, realizing that maybe he'd been dealing with the same judgmental behavior his whole life and had just handled it differently. Our son started smiling, then laughing, then rolling over and hitting all his milestones with Sarah and me cheering him on. Every moment felt precious. Every first felt monumental, and not once did I regret my decision to protect him from toxicity. People still asked about my parents, distant relatives would comment on social media, wondering why they never saw grandparent photos. I ignored most of it, blocked some people, and focused on the family I was building rather than the one I'd lost. On my son's first birthday, as we were celebrating with a small party at our house, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It was my dad, his first direct contact in 9 months. The The message was long, rambling, and clearly written and rewritten multiple times based on the tone shifts. He talked about regret, about missing out on his grandson's first year, about how empty the house felt without family gatherings. He admitted that he'd said terrible things, that he'd let his own prejudices and pride get in the way of what mattered. "I was wrong about Sarah," he wrote. "I was wrong about a lot of things. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope someday I can prove to you that I'm trying to be better." I showed the message to Sarah, watched her read it carefully, her brow furrowed in concentration. "What do you want to do?" she asked, always putting my feelings first, even though she was the one who'd been hurt. I didn't know, honestly. Part of me wanted to respond immediately, wanted to believe that people could change, that my dad had finally seen the light. But another part remembered the half-apology months ago, remembered the pattern of behavior that stretched back years. "I need time to think about it," I told her, and she nodded in understanding. That night after the party ended and our son was asleep, I sat in his nursery and really reflected on everything that had happened. I thought about the dad who taught me to tie my shoes and the dad who insulted my wife. I thought about the family I'd imagined having and the family I actually had. I thought about what I wanted my son to learn about loyalty, about boundaries, about standing up for the people you love. The truth was, my dad's message seemed more genuine than anything he'd said before. But words are easy and change is hard. I needed to see sustained effort, not just a text message on my son's birthday that might have been motivated by guilt or loneliness. I needed to know that if I let him back into our lives, he wouldn't hurt my wife again, wouldn't make my son feel like he wasn't good enough, wouldn't recreate the same toxic patterns. So I decided to respond, but carefully. I told him I appreciated his message and his apparent growth, but that reconciliation would be a slow process, if it happened at all. I laid out clear boundaries, non-negotiable conditions about how Sarah would be treated, what kind of language was acceptable around our son, and what would happen if those boundaries were crossed. His response came quickly. "I understand. I'll do whatever it takes." We started with supervised video calls, short 15-minute conversations where my dad could see his grandson, but Sarah and I controlled the environment. The first few were awkward, with my dad clearly unsure what to say and me ready to end the call at the first sign of disrespect. But slowly, over weeks and then months, something shifted. My dad asked about Sarah's job, complimented her on how well she was doing with our son, apologized directly to her for his past behavior. It felt genuine in a way his previous attempts hadn't, like he'd actually done the work to examine his own biases and prejudices. My mom joined some of the calls too, and while she was more hesitant to directly apologize, she at least stopped making excuses for my dad's behavior. They sent gifts for our son, appropriate ones that showed they'd paid attention to his interests and developmental stage. When our son turned 18 months, we allowed a supervised in-person visit at a neutral location, a park where we could leave easily if needed. Watching my dad hold his grandson for the first time was complicated, filled with joy and sadness, and a strange sense of grief for all the time that had been lost. Emily cried, happy to see the family starting to come back together, even in this limited way. Through all of this, I learned some hard truths about family and loyalty that I wish I'd understood earlier. I learned that loving someone doesn't mean accepting their worst behavior, that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is establish firm boundaries. I learned that the family you create through marriage and children can be just as important, if not more so, than the family you're born into. I learned that real apologies include changed behavior, not just pretty words or half-hearted admissions of wrongdoing. Most importantly, I learned that protecting your spouse and children from toxicity isn't selfish, it's necessary. Sarah taught me that through her grace under pressure, her willingness to forgive when real change was shown, and her fierce protection of our son's well-being. My relationship with my parents will probably never be what it once was, and maybe that's okay. Maybe it was built on an illusion anyway, on me believing they were more accepting and less judgmental than they actually were. The relationship we're building now is more honest, built on explicit expectations and clear boundaries, rather than assumptions and denial. It's not perfect, but it's real, and real is better than fake harmony any day. I know some people watching this will think I overreacted, that I should have forgiven my dad immediately, that family is family no matter what. To those people, I ask, at what point is enough enough? How many insults should my wife endure? How many times should my child be told they're not real family before I'm allowed to draw a line? The idea that blood relation automatically deserves unlimited forgiveness is toxic and needs to end. Yes, people make mistakes, and yes, people can change, but victims aren't obligated to accept abuse while waiting for that change to happen. I also know people will say I kept a grandfather from his grandchild over pride or stubbornness, but that misses the point entirely. I didn't keep my son from having a grandfather. My dad did that himself through his words and actions. He created the situation, he escalated it, and he maintained it until he was ready to do the real work of change. My job as a father isn't to maintain relationships at all costs. It's to protect my child and teach him what healthy relationships look like. Sometimes that means saying no to people, even people we love, even people we wish were different than they are. Today, my son is almost 2 years old, talking in short sentences, running everywhere, and bringing joy to everyone who meets him. Sarah and I are stronger than ever, our relationship tempered and tested by fire and proven solid. Emily is his favorite aunt and babysits regularly, bringing him gifts and energy that exhaust us but delight him. My parents see him once a month now, always supervised visits, always with clear boundaries in place. My dad has kept his word so far, treating Sarah with respect and never making comments about our son's worthiness or belonging. My mom has gotten better too, actually apologizing to Sarah in a real way and expressing regret for the years of subtle hostility. Marcus and I still don't speak, and I'm not sure we ever will. Some bridges burn completely and can't be rebuilt. But the rest of my life has never been better, fuller, or more authentic than it is right now. We're planning to have another child soon, and this time there's no anxiety about family reactions, no dread about how they'll be treated. If my parents continue their growth, great, and if they don't, we'll adjust accordingly. The difference is that now I'm not afraid to make the hard choices, not afraid to prioritize my immediate family over extended family relationships. That confidence, that clarity came from the hardest period of my life, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. If you're in a similar situation, if you're caught between a spouse and your family of origin, I want you to know that you're not alone and you're not crazy for feeling torn. It's one of the hardest positions to be in because you love everyone involved and want everyone to just get along. But here's what I wish someone had told me earlier. You cannot sacrifice your spouse's dignity and your children's well-being to keep peace with people who refuse to respect them. You cannot set yourself on fire to keep other people warm, even if those people raised you and love you in their own flawed way. The choice might seem impossible, but when you really look at it, when you really examine what each side is asking of you, it becomes clear. One side is asking for respect and protection. The other is demanding that you tolerate disrespect and harm. One side is willing to build something new and healthy. The other wants to maintain old patterns, regardless of who gets hurt. Choose the people who choose you and your family. Choose the people who are willing to grow and change. Choose the people who treat your spouse like a human being, deserving of respect and dignity. My story doesn't have a perfect ending, because real life isn't a movie where everything resolves neatly in 2 hours. My relationship with my parents is tentative and will probably always carry some scars from what was said and done. But my marriage is solid, my son is thriving, and I can look at myself in the mirror knowing I stood up for what was right, even when it cost me dearly. That peace, that knowledge that I protected the people who needed me most, is worth more than any perfect family photo or holiday gathering could ever be. Sometimes, revenge isn't about getting back at someone. It's about refusing to accept their treatment anymore and building a better life despite their attempts to tear you down. And sometimes, playing hooky from family obligations isn't rebellion. It's self-preservation and the first step toward healing. Thank you for listening to my story. And I hope it helps someone out there who's facing similar impossible choices. You're stronger than you know, and you deserve to be surrounded by people who see your worth.